Hi everyone, how's everybody doing today? This is Chapter 9. We're going to look at community ecology. So tonight you're just going to have me talking over some of these slides for a little while, hopefully not very long, and we're going to forego the music. I think some of the problems we were having with the YouTube uploads and the dissemination of the videos were the music and things I was using to support the videos were not in being conducive and playing well with copyright on YouTube has gotten quite strict, and therefore was preventing some of these things to getting shared across mobile devices and just basically sending the information out. So I'm going to skip the music, and hopefully you can play your own music in the background if you like while we go through this short presentation. But in this one, we're going to look at something that's close to our heart down here in South Florida. We're going to look at the Everglades. And specifically, we're going to look at the wood stork, and we're going to say, what does the stork say? Well, the stork can't say anything, but we're going to look at this bird species in the Everglades and see how this bird can reveal the intricacies of a threatened ecosystem. Hopefully, at the end of this chapter, chapter 9, you'll understand that there's a connectedness between the pieces of an ecological community, and by studying these connectedness, we may better understand and learn how to protect and help restore some of the damaged ecosystems we have here in our backyard, particularly in the Everglades. Now, here we are right down here with a little picture. I hope at this point in your lives, if you are in this online course and in the South Florida area, I know some of you may not be, welcome any military people we have out there around the world, but we're going to reference the Everglades National Park and go a few miles down the road and you will run into them. You can't really miss it, the Everglades. So at the end of this unit, hopefully you will know that there is and have some understanding or some knowledge of the ecological succession that can help an ecosystem restore itself. And in particular, we're going to look at the words ecological succession and what that means. We're going to look at species interactions and how they contribute to the overall viability of the ecosystem. So you might just think that the wood stork is just one animal in the ecosystem in the Everglades, but we're going to look at how this particular animal and other animals actually have an impact on our own lives. We're going to look at both the biotic and abiotic features of a system and how they can be negatively impacted by human activity. So, once again, humans are going to play a culprit in this world of connected ecological systems, and we're going to see how we are interacting and what's going on. So let's take a look. The case study here. Nesting pairs of wood storks in the Florida Everglades have experienced a rapid and serious decrease in population. In their efforts to restore the wood stork population to viable levels, scientists found that the entire ecosystem was at risk. So, remember previous chapters. How do we even know that the wood stork is experiencing a decrease in population? People go out and study them. They study the wood storks. They look at their nesting habits. They can calculate and understand probability of population densities based on carrying capacities of the land. Okay, we've learned about this already. Hopefully this is something new to you. And you can see over time in a succession or time-related pattern, you can see that the populations decline. And it might seem like it's a hard thing to go out and count every single bird or wood stork you see and make a viable assessment on the population of this animal. But it's done, and it is done by wildlife biologists, conservation biologists, people that work in the Everglades, and people, volunteers, and other folks who are interested just as well. But in doing so, they found that not only the assessment of the wood stork was important, but what it was showing about the ecosystem itself, about the overall health of the ecosystem, and they found that it was at risk. So the question then is, why is it at risk? Well, in order to understand why it's at risk, we need to understand the well-being of a species and its dependence on the health of the ecosystem. Because if the wood stork is declining and it lives in an ecosystem which is sort of, I guess, suffering from its accustomed health in some ways, then we can study the ecosystem to see what ways the ecosystem functions and to give it a risk assessment, and then we can see how it impacts the species of the birds. So how does a system function the way it does? And what are the characteristics that allow some species to thrive, and how do other organisms interact with each other within that environment? These are the questions that are asked within the field of community ecology. And community ecology also includes understanding how species contribute to ecosystems services like pollination, water purification, and trapping contaminants. Now, very important things for all of us to think about. Here's a nice picture of our lovely Everglades here, and we can see that this specific ecosystem is not just home to the wood stork or the infamous or famous alligator. Okay, it's home to many, many, many things, and these many, many things and organisms interact with each other, and they form a ecosystem. Not only is it just the ecosystems of living things, it's non-living things. And from the text, you can recall that these are referring to biotic and abiotic features of ecosystems. Biotic means life. Abiotic means non-life or non-living. So life are all the plants and animals and microorganisms and everything that live in that ecosystem. And the abiotic things are things like the nutrients found in the soils that are there, the water tables, the atmospheric conditions that interact with these things. Those are the abiotic, the rocks and stuff like that are associated. So those are the things. Well, we can study all those things. And then, of course, there's humans. And humans have interrupted the balance of the community and changed the way the Everglades functions. The wood stork case has shown that how minor changes in the environment can have major changes in the overall health of the ecosystem. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to see a little bit how we can do that and what we can study. Some of the ecosystem services you might think about are things like carbon processing, climate control, contaminant capture. Anyone ever been into an airboat and you go to a part of the ecosystem and you kind of just turn off the engine and hang out for a little while? Yeah, it's fun, right? And all of a sudden you get that true smell of the Everglades. Oh yeah, it's stinky, right? But that's actually good. That's decomposition of organic debris that's releasing nutrients and things out into the soil, and it also contains contaminants. And it recycles the stuff, and it filters the water through the root systems as it flows from Okeechobee down and through the oceans. It acts as a big, huge kind of Brita filter, if you will. I'm sorry not to do copyright infringement on that one. But we can also look at economic resources through raw materials. You think there's anything in the Everglades that we mine out of there? Watch one of the videos I posted about oil. Energy conversion, flood control, food production. Anyone have alligator or frog legs? Food production, nutrient storage, photosynthesis, pollination, seed banking, soil fertility, storm protection, waste elimination, water purification, storage, and wind buffer. The all-important wind buffer. Tell you what, that's a super important one especially when it comes to high wind events such as hurricanes and tropical storms that want to tear through southern Florida and anywhere around the Gulf. So often you pull down the ability to create a wind buffer. It's just going to increase the wind energy that allows for water to be surging, or oceanic water, should say, be surging inland. Hey, we get the floods that way, right? That now is this. Okay, so is development happening on the Everglades? Absolutely. And of course, how many thousands and thousands and billions of dollars do we raise from the tourists coming down to see the Everglades? Lots and lots and lots and lots of money. And these folks come down, and just like you and I who have ever taken an airboat ride, it's a great way to go in and look at the Everglades firsthand, and a great way to teach people about ecosystems and conservation efforts of the Everglades. So I am not saying don't do this, but I'm just saying that realize that the tourism industry is huge, and it's like this. You start taking away habitat. When you start taking away habitat, you can start to lose the viable places where species can live. Okay? Now, it looks like a very complicated little diagram here, but this is called a food web. Okay? The thing is this: if you take away viable land and you move that into a habitat that is not suitable for these particular animals to be living in, they're either going to A, go elsewhere, B, they're going to die out because the carrying capacity of land has been degraded so far that it can't even sustain one or two of the wood storks or even a raccoon or something, but it can support perhaps a house with piped in plumbing and a pool so you can stay cool. So the human could replace that ecosystem, and these animals then have to either move elsewhere or they die out. Okay, so when we lose a single species, it can disrupt now the health and the movement of nutrients and the energy flow through that entire system. Okay, we just took away a raccoon and a sawgrass because instead of the sawgrass, okay, we're going to blow that over and make a house. And so we're not going to be able to hang out there. And because of all of our noise and our lights, we're going to scare off the raccoons too. So let's take the raccoon and the sawgrass out there. Now it seems like, okay, so some sawgrass was gone. There's millions and millions of miles of it. And the raccoon's gone. It just got into your trash anyway, right? Wrong. Now we have fewer places for this energy to move through the web chain here, okay? Before that Florida red-bellied turtle, okay, had that sawgrass to eat, now it only has the bladderwort in this example, all right? So, for example, what if we had 2 red-bellied turtles? Now there's only 1 bladderwort. Who's going to eat what? Are they each going to get half the bladderwort? Because if they each get half the bladderwort, then their body's going to get half the energy it needs to live. So 2 turtles will be living on half the energy. And so now when the alligator eats 1 turtle, it's not going to be as energy nutritious for this alligator. Does that make sense? So these are what's happening in the food chain. Now let's take away a little bit more. Okay? We're reducing even further the amount of food dynamics and the food diversity in an ecosystem. And we can reduce it even further, and we keep reducing it because we keep building and changing the ecosystem into a non-natural stretch of land that used to look like 1913 and now looks like that 1997 photo. And we changed that from native sawgrass into homes, strip malls, Sawgrass Mall, Dolphin Mall, Miami Dolphins Stadium, Marlins Stadium, whatever. You know what I'm saying? They just changed the whole landscape because human population, recalled chapter 2 and, 1, 2, and 3, human populations and how they can sustain on the earth and what's happening in South Florida. Okay? So the idea here is that the energy is the basis of the food web. And photosynthetic organisms are basically capturing the light from the energy from the sun, and it stores it as the sugars. This is how the sawgrass is going to grow, the bladderwort is going to grow, and it's actually also how the periphyton, basically the algae in your water sources, grow also. The sunlight can penetrate into water and use that to create sugars that it makes into in photosynthesis. Okay. So these primary consumers are called are the people or the people are the organisms that are eating these photosynthetic plants. Okay, the primary consumers, they're the herbivores. These are people that the organisms that eat plants for the energy, and most of the energy is released as heat, but the remainder supports metabolism and become the biomass of the consumer at the next level. Now that's textbook way of explaining what I just told you. Okay, that yes, most of the energy goes into making heat for the animal, meaning it keeps its body at a certain temperature. And many of these animals do that. But the point here is the energy flow. Okay. Now, hopefully you're understanding this well enough. And to make things a little bit more tricky, we call them trophic levels, or TL. Okay. Producers are TL1, primary consumers are TL2, secondary consumers are TL3, tertiary consumers are TL4, quaternary consumers are TL5. Question: where are humans in this trophic level? Humans probably. Do we eat alligator? Mm-hmm. Do we eat fish? Yup. Do we eat some sort of birds? Some of us do. Do we eat turtles? Well, I don't know what you're eating. Snails, shrimp? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And TL1s? Do you eat any of those herbaceous organisms? Spinach? Lettuce? Yep. We're eating a whole bunch of that stuff, okay? Then it makes it a little bit even more important because, as you can see, as the energy is delivered from the sun into the plants, into the turtle, into the raccoon, into other animals as it moves up the food chain. Okay, you get a loss of energy transfer. So what this is saying is the energy transfer is not 1-to-1. Okay, if I eat a marshmallow, every single bit of the energy that made that marshmallow doesn't go into my body. It goes in, or it goes in, but it doesn't get transferred into usable energy to me. Okay, a lot of it gets lost in the fact in the process, in the metabolic process of turning that marshmallow into usable energy. Okay, so most of the energy is lost as heat. So a small percentage of the energy, carbohydrates, if you will, if there's any nutrition or nurses or dietitians or nutritionists or whatever out there like this stuff. So the small percentage of the usable good energy is passed on to the next level. All right. So that's kind of what's happening up the food chain here. Okay. The producers set the budget for the food in the system through their availability to convert light energy into chemical energy. How cool is that? That's how life started. Primary consumers will eat producers. Most of the energy is released in heat. The rest is used to support metabolism, and a small amount becomes the biomass. Biomass meaning the meat and the bones and the stuff that makes up the animals. The secondary consumers eat primary. If the storks, as you can see here, are grazing in the water in the Everglades marsh stuff here. All right, they're eating all this green stuff here and some of the phytoplankton. So we're going to take a little bit of this away because the stork is eating it. Okay, and they are also going to eat these little things here that are eating these things that eat here. So, okay, the point is you start reducing the diversity, you start taking the wood stork away, and you're going to then change the dynamics of a food web and looking at how nutrients cycle through this particular trophic level. Okay, interesting. The same thing we can think about is when well, never mind. You haven't gotten to that reading yet. It's later in the semester. But we'll get back to that. Talking about how humans produce our own food trophic level, food chain, and what that means. Okay, so if we're looking at now the classification of a food web and the trophic levels of energy among the ecosystem, we can also start to look at how are the factors of the particular Everglades shaping those ecosystems. Okay, so we saw a little bit about that earlier, but in this case, you want to look at what's called the biotic and the abiotic components of the ecosystem, like I mentioned before, where the biotic is the living and the abiotic is the non-living parts of the ecosystems, and see how they intersect and see how all of this kind of shakes out. In the Everglades, flooding from the rainy season allows fish to reproduce and grow over thousands of acres. Question: when is the rainy season for the Everglades? I'm not going to tell you the answer, but see if you know just by going around and living here long enough, or look it up. As dry down begins, and the water recedes, foraging storks follow the concentrations of fish. Okay, take this area here and make it shrink because the water drains away and evaporates away in this southern Florida heat. Where are the fish going to go? They're going to become large and much more concentrated in this body of water, and the abiotic portion of this, the water. And so now this is going to take the foraging storks and follow the patterns of concentrated fish. Of course they would. That's what they eat. Why wouldn't they go to areas where they can more easily get fish and food instead of going to areas of the ecosystem that it's much more difficult to find the stuff that they want to eat? And the birds know this. They're not idiots. It's how they live their lives, following food around. So they know where to go on a seasonal pattern, and that's what they do. So the connectedness between the landscape and the life is common in the Everglades. Right? So can you see how the rains create flooded pools? The flooded pools can then spawn the fish. The waters recede because of drainage and then because of evaporation from the sun in particular seasons of the year, throughout Florida or southern Florida, that then changes the foraging patterns of the wood stork so it can go and access the food it needs in order to survive and reproduce and stay warm, and start to cycle over again. So this is what's happening when we see that there's an ecosystem, and the non-living and the living forces are intersecting with each other. When two ecosystems meet, okay, so we have the Everglades that are meeting up against a huge whole large area of mangrove trees or forests. You can tell obviously that the mangrove trees and forests doesn't quite look like the sawgrass that's spreading for miles with flooded pools. Well, when the mangroves and the flooded pools flood, there's mangroves that are intersecting with this particular sawgrass. This is what, when you have this occurring, we call that an ecotone. Ecotomes occur when two distinct ecosystems meet. And the physical differences between the two areas create edge effects, which either attract or repel some species. So some species use a part of each community to live, and in the case of the mango trees and the seagrass or sawgrass, they provide examples of an ecotone, and it's used by, say, the snapper. Okay, where you have the mangrove trees down here. Okay, we have flooding happening right here during the day, or I should say water table. The snapper goat and especially the baby snapper live among these roots. Okay, which makes it much more difficult for predators to get them because they're basically entrapped in this entanglement of wood. Here's your ecotone, right? Because out here at nighttime, when they feel they're under cover of dark, okay, they swim out a little further to the seagrass bed, and they go feed on their little things they want to get, okay, and then when they've had their fill and it's getting too late, they swim back over here and they stay right here in the shades and away from predators, okay. Change all this stuff that we were just looking at, okay. So the canals and levees had dramatically altered water levels. Ecosystems were being starved, affected by hypersalinity, excessive nutrients, and non-native species. So the hypersalinity was allowing for salt water because the tides to kind of flow back into these channels that we made to divert the water flow the way we wanted, based on the tides and the densities between fresh and salt water and temperature differences allowed actually saline water to permeate back inland where the animals and the plants were not accustomed to growing in the pH levels and the acidity, or I should say the levels of salinity or salt in the water. It also brought down excessive nutrients through abundant runoff of agricultural fertilizers off the farms that we grew. We needed to grow all the food to support the people that were living in the area in which we needed to divert the water in the first place. So if you're interested more about agro, there's a few more people in the department you should talk to besides myself. I'm not an agro expert, but it happens. And it's also introduced non-native species as more animals and plants are brought around, specifically, say, for example, the python that people raised in their homes and got too big and released into the Amazon, in which it doesn't belong. It's causing havoc. And in 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, CERP, or CERP, began a 30-year plan for the Everglades restoration through 60 construction projects. All right. Basically, the historic flow, you can see, was down south and east, and the goal for CERP is to restore that flow to where it was. So we had the flow going like this. This is how it looks now to the east and west, and a little bit out here through these channels. You see all these little channels that were built? Okay. Now CERP wants to make that flow back the way it was, to filter the water how it was normally intentionally supposed to do. Well, I say normally, but I mean naturally, and by naturally I mean, sorry. Well, we just went through that the water is not permeating through the Everglades the way it used to be, right? So when we change the water, we're going to change the ecosystem. When we change the ecosystem, we're going to change the species that can live in that particular area, and therefore then we're going to alter the food web that is available in this area of land, which then affects the trophic levels or the passing of available energy through successive levels of eaters. Okay? So in the Everglades, you can see, and I'm not going to read all this, you can read this, it's in your text, but you can see here that in the slough, when we drain out this water or make it a little bit lower and add some of this sawgrass in here and sediment accumulation, we're then going to grow sawgrass marsh. That will then grow up and die and then falls and decomposes, and successive seasons come in and wash some out and splash some in, and more grows and more dies and gets broken off by the wind and blown around and compacted a little bit. And, well, anyway, you finally get into an area that can support some species that are particular types of trees. For example, down in the Everglades, there's the cypress and the willow. Okay, those come in, they start growing because they're very water tolerant type trees, and now you have their root systems permeating through the soil. Picture doesn't show it very well. Permeating through the soil here and locking in and creating an even more stable structure for things to grow on. It's also going to produce some sun dynamics and shade dynamics, and will now start to build up into a mixed swamp forest type thing. Okay, as this grows and grows and grows, it starts to rise literally above the water table, because look, all these leaves fall off, branches fall off, trees get knocked over time, stuff decomposes and moves around, and animals crawl through them and everything else, and it turns up into this harder area of drier land. Okay, this is actually what is known as a hammock, and you may have heard of the hammocks, or you may have heard of areas in the Everglades that are referred to as that hammock or something like that. That's areas of slightly elevated land which is much drier and tolerates a much different types of ecosystem than, say, the slough. Okay, so this is what happens over time, and it goes the other way. Okay, because if we take this water right here, and then we all of a sudden raise that water table higher to this, we revert back to here, because the trees and things that are living here that can't live in saturated environments will start to die off, and that just leaves the mixed swamp forest animal species such as the cypress trees or the willows, and ultimately those will die off because the shrubs will get covered and will no longer have access to oxygen, which it needs, and it will go back to, and these will die, which will increase all of the sun exposure because the trees are gone, so more sunlight will reach down here to fuel the sawgrass marsh, and then ultimately those will die off when the water gets high enough and the water quality goes down, okay, through filtration. So this is the succession of what's happening. Now, have humans directly impacted this? Of course, that's what the whole chapter is about. Okay, so as one ecological community replaces another, the changes are largely predictable. People study how this happens, and we can see what happens there. By the way, the FIU golden panther, okay, likes to live in the Everglades, specifically in the hardwood hammocks. The area is raised a little bit above the water table so they can live on dry land and have their nests and reproduce. Panthers are not aquatic species, all right? So the FIU panther, classic example, okay? As the change continues over time, plants and animals will replace their predecessors, okay? So this is what I've just described to you over time in the mature forest, but you can see what happens in the Everglades as succession occurs. It's very highly dependent on the water level. Now, if we reduce the water level or change the way the water is flowing through the Everglades, doing so in all of this, where does the wood stork live in all of this? The wood stork is one of the animals that requires all of these things, because I'm not going to go through the whole food chain again, but because of the slough and the sawgrass marsh, each area are producing different trophic level animals that feed the next level. Does that make sense? So that's what's happening, and that's why if we study the stork and we realize that the stork has been died off, and the reason why it's died off is because some of these areas of the Everglades have turned into ecological succession ecosystems. Okay, we took all that water that was diverting south and made it go east-west. We're creating and turning the sloth and the sawgrass into the hardwood hammocks. The storks don't live in the hardwood hammocks. They live over in the areas that they can reach the things they need to eat. Of course, yes, I know they can fly around too. But you see what I'm saying? This is the idea of the changing, of studying a particular animal can help you understand not only the population dynamics of this animal, but the health of the ecosystem. Okay? The health of the ecosystem. It is just like studying humans. Okay? When you study humans, if you populate homes all around the town dump and then wonder why there is leaching chemicals into the water that's making children sick. Well, I mean, you see, it's like it's evaluating the sickness of the species, in that case the human, because they're getting sick. Why? Because of the ecosystem, the living and non-living surrounding environments have changed in some way that's not conducive to the survival of the species. And that's how we can study these things. Okay? In the case of the stork, that's what we're looking at. So hopefully this case of the stork is one of interest to you. And if you've never been out and seen any of these particular animals, go out to the Everglades, go meet up with a ranger. Please go see a ranger and just talk to them. They're all wonderful sources of information. And if you have any interest in doing any of this stuff yourself, you absolutely can. You can actually become a forest ranger. You can be someone who works in this field to help understand what's happening. And certainly you can take individual steps to help the survival of the wood stork, the Everglades, the human beings, whatever you want. And how do you do so? Okay, so maintain your studying in this course, maintain your studying in more courses, and do what you can do to learn all about the abiotic and biotic worlds and ecosystems around you and the science. And to tell you what, take lots of classes in writing and communication. Because if you take individual steps by visiting parks or nature parks, looking at signs of interactions, listening to animals, looking at predation or herbivory behavior, you can support your national wildlife systems and the parks by donating money. I mean, you can go and visit, and there's all kinds of things you can do as an individual. But if you major in English or you get some good English communication classes in there, or these days, using the web or learning how to communicate and use communication through multimedia is super powerful. But if you can do that, you can then formulate group action. And you can use the Everglades as a case study to help yourselves inform other people and say what's happening in your local park, not just the National Everglades, but what's happening in a local park right in your backyard. How about the local nature preserve? Or what kind of restoration work is being done right around your neighborhood, or your schools, or your family's schools, or wherever you're interested in living and learning next. Maybe you take the Everglades idea, but you really, really want to move to California. So see what they're doing out there. Or check out Texas, or Maine, or North Dakota, or anywhere. The whole point is to get out there and look and do stuff and have fun and be safe while you're doing it. Because the more you experience and the more you learn, the more you can understand how your individual steps can affect group action, and which can ultimately turn into policy change with good stewardship and great communication. Check out the website listed on the bottom for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and look at that open space blog to learn more about issues facing our beloved wood storks and everything else. Hope you enjoy this one. Keep up the great work. I'll see you next time.